You just said you believe the conflict between Israel and Iran is over. What makes you so confident it is? And what do you do if it isn't?
Because I dealt with both, and they're both tired, exhausted. They fought very, very hard and very viciously, very violently, and they were both satisfied to go home and get out. And can it start again? I guess someday it can. It could maybe start soon. I think the war ended actually when we hit the various nuclear sites with the planes. I think Israel's going to get back to doing what they do, and I think that Iran's going to get back. You know, Iran has a huge advantage. They have great oil, and they can do things. I don't see them getting back involved in the nuclear business anymore. I think they've had it. They've been at it for 20 years, and I don't see that happen.
Donald Trump, as always, speaking so definitively, authoritatively, that it is over. It's conclusive. Well, I'm not sure everybody's going to go along with that ride and that take on things. And as you can see, we have one of our best friends here of the show, Colonel Doug McGregor, defense and foreign policy analyst, former advisor to the Secretary of Defense. Doug, how are you?
Oh, great. How could I be any better under the circumstances?
Well, there we go. Doug, listen, I know I'm just sitting this with you right now. It just happened moments ago that he just got off the stage from making these comments. What's your original impression of how he's portraying things?
Well, Gary, just a quick observation. First of all, everybody over the age of 50, with very few exceptions, watches what I call boomer TV, and they will believe whatever this man says. I mean, that's the simple fact. Now, I think it's very, very ill-advised for a president of the United States to claim that a war is over when it has only just begun. Now, he may well believe that. That's a possibility. I can't imagine it, because I think we're at the start of a much longer period of conflict. Now, how long it will last and what the outcome will be, I don't know. But to make that statement strikes me as walking out on the very edge and trying to jump across the chasm, on the assumption that you're going to make it in one leap. I just don't think so. So that's the first thing. I wouldn't have said it. But then again, this is vintage Donald Trump. Secondly, his description of what actually happened is very confusing and incoherent. First of all, it's not true. I think that's the most important thing to mention. And that's something a president should avoid. You just don't want to be caught in a position of saying something that is not necessarily true. Sometimes I get the impression that President Trump says things and believes that he can wish them into reality. If he says it boldly and long enough, then ultimately it will come true. But that's rarely how it works in international relations. So we did not destroy the nuclear development capability. That's nonsense. It's now well established. And again, Boomer TV will tell you, yeah, it's absolutely done and wonderful, and we're on our ways the up and up, but it's not. So I wish I could say something good along the lines of God bless the president. He's done a great job and we're off to the races, but we're not.
Yeah, Doug, they are hammering home that narrative of success, complete success, obliteration. And he even went further, obviously he was asked about that today, and he went further discussing, in fact, so many of the different parts of the administration, whether it be Witkoff, whether it be Marco Rubio, whether it be Hegseth, they're all saying, in fact, very little different things, but all details they're getting into as to how things unfolded and the success that they had. But let's go back to the commander-in-chief and what he had to say about what transpired.
Is there any indication from U.S. intelligence that Iran was able to move any material, including
No, just
uranium?
the opposite. We think we hit them so hard and so fast they didn't get to move. And if you knew about that material, it's very hard and very dangerous to move. It's called in many people they call it dust, but it's very, very heavy. It's very, very hard to move. And they were way down, they're 30 stories down. They're literally 30, 35 stories down underground.
I think you got it all.
Oh yeah, we think we think it's covered with granite, concrete, and steel.
Doug, they're getting into the details more and more as they go along here to finalize this narrative, it seems.
Well, it's not going to make any difference because the narrative is going to be exploded in the future. We know that those sites were effectively empty. Now, did the Iranians with 2 hours notice managed that? I don't think so. I think that the Intelligence Committee was either blindsided or we just ignored it. You know, President Trump has a habit, which is, by the way, not unique to him. LBJ engaged in this sort of thing. I think you've got to accept the fact that if he doesn't like it, it doesn't fit his agenda, that he'll simply, hand wave it off. And I think that's what happened. He decided to believe whatever the Israelis provided, I suspect, through their minions in the White House. And he said, fine, let's go do this. It didn't make any difference. And it hasn't ended the war. It hasn't stopped anything. Those are the facts. Now, there's something else. An old friend of mine who is now retired, who served in Vietnam as well as in Desert Storm, and then subsequently retired in the late 1990s. He called me immediately and he said, as soon as the president or anyone else stands up and starts to tell you our great servicemen and our military and on, how great they are and they're the best, he said, immediately step back. He says, you're about to listen to a load of bull. And what they're interested in doing is distracting everyone from what actually happened. And how many times have you listened to Hegseth, Rubio, Trump, over and over and over? Oh, no one else could have done this. We're the greatest, and on and on and on. Okay, fine. We have an old expression, nonsense talks, but performance walks. And
that's a nice way of saying it.
I think this is a mistake to do what he's done. But whatever. I think we're at war with Iran. That's not over. Iran is still at war with Israel. Israel is absolutely at war with Iran. And for that matter, increasingly the whole Muslim world.
Doug, you said something. You said it quickly, and I'm afraid that it's getting glossed over. It sure stood out to me, and it still stands out to me how Trump took the advice or took the intel from Israel, completely ignoring, at least from what we can tell on the surface, his own intel, his own intelligence community. How much does that bother you?
Well, it's not surprising. As I said, LBJ did that sort of thing. Several presidents have. A good example of someone who didn't, interestingly enough, is Richard Nixon. He talked to Kissinger. This is before the strategic arms limitations talks and before we completed any of the agreements that emerged from those talks on arms control. And Nixon asked Kissinger, what do you think? Do you think this is real? And they were looking at the intelligence assessments that had been provided by the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. And Kissinger said, I'm not confident they're accurate. Now, these painted a picture that was not only ominous for the whole world based upon what they were imputing to the Soviets, but it turned out that it also was largely inaccurate. So Nixon said, well, listen, let's check this. And Kissinger said, I'll do it. So what Kissinger did, which I think was very, very smart, is that he brought to Washington the station chiefs across Eastern Europe and in Central Asia that were, in Turkey in particular, that were watching everything that the Soviets did in terms of their nuclear stockpile and nuclear weapons development. Brought them to the White House. They got into a room with Kissinger and they came out with a completely different assessment. And ultimately, the result was the strategic arms limitation talk. So in that case, Kissinger and Nixon recognized this is not necessarily the director of the CIA lying in that case. It was more a question of the status quo bureaucracy in Langley that produced one answer. And the answer that came from the field where people dealt with this every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week was different. But you're talking about Nixon and Kissinger, they wanted to achieve something, with the Russians, and they were absolutely determined that they were going to find a way to do it, and they were smart enough to question, whatever came out of the bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. Now, in this case, President Trump decided he didn't like what he was being told, and he was going to go ahead and do what he thought was appropriate, and I think he placed a lot of trust and confidence in what the Mossad said.
And at the same time, demoralizing his own team.
What do you mean team? What team? What team is he demoralizing?
Oh, I just let's say the Tulsi Gabbard, the CIA. I mean, go down the list of the Larry.
Wait a minute. Don't assume that Radcliffe had any problems with this. I think you've got to go and look at Blumenthal's most recent article where he talks about Radcliffe as the Mossad stenographer sitting in
Really?
the CIA. No, I think we've got a lot of people who are compromised. And that's just one example. I think probably the only person that pushed back at all was Tulsi Gabbard.
Right.
And
But only for a while, right?
Well, I mean, you've got to make a decision. Are you going to push back and then make this an existential decision? Either you believe me, or if you don't and you press ahead with this, I can't support it, I resign. Or do you say, whoops, okay, boss, I'll stay on board. And apparently she decided to stay on board.
Yeah, it was no hill for her to die on, I guess. Let me flesh it out a little bit more, because Trump explains even more his thinking and what all is going on and what he foresees going forward with Iran in this case.
Are you interested in restarting negotiations with Iran? And if so, have they reciprocated?
So
Or is
our
this sort of a
people,
settled
Marco
matter?
could answer this, but our people are not, I'm not. The way I look at it, they fought, the war's done, and, I could get a statement that they're not going to go nuclear. We're probably going to ask for that, but they're not going to be doing it. But they're not going to be doing it anyway. They've had it.
Doug, when I hear that, it's almost like he's declaring their surrender for them. And it's like, well, that dog don't hunt.
Well, the Israelis fully expected that Iran would collapse within the first 24 to 72 hours under the weight of their initial airstrikes. And
Hammering, yeah.
Then Ben Gurion, a few days later, admitted publicly what nobody in the Israeli government or anywhere in the Israeli media would admit, which is, gosh, we underestimated the Iranian arsenal. We didn't appreciate it. And that's why they came to us immediately, said, you've got to get into this war. You've got to bail us out. You've got to help us. And I think Donald Trump wrestled with that because obviously his donors want him to do that. And he's the prisoner of his donors to a large extent because they put him into the White House. You can't ignore them. But on the other hand, he really doesn't want a war. So he opted for what I think in retrospect will be seen as more of a PR stunt, a staged event, political theater, call it whatever you want. And these strikes, were announced before we went in. We told them we were coming in 2 hours. There was no, as far as I can tell, pushback from the integrated air defense systems. No missiles were fired. I don't know if they turned their radars on or not. I'm sure they have the radar cross-section target form for the B-2s and everything else anyway. They're not a secret and haven't been for a while. So I don't know, but I think that's basically what happened. And what's dangerous now is that he's imputing to this a steady state outcome. Right. The truth is, and he let it slip very briefly. If you listen to that remark, so, well, it could happen again. In other words, this could break out again. Yeah, it could break out tomorrow. It could break out in 6 weeks. It could break out in 2 months. We don't know. And right now, we know that the Israelis are running out of cash and missiles. And I'm sure we're trying to send them everything we possibly can. By the way, we have fired hundreds of missiles from our destroyers in support of the Israelis and their air defense against incoming Iranian missiles. We're about out. Our ships have to go back to port to reload. I know that our THAAD battery on the ground has had to fire virtually everything it has. There was an article that came out, I think, within the last 24 hours in a trade magazine where a representative from Raytheon admitted that we've got a real problem with rocket motors. And it affects certain classes of missiles. I think it's the Standard Missile 2, Standard Missile 6, can't remember, also AMRAAM, a number of missiles out there. Well, that's because we don't manufacture the rocket motors. We manufacture components. We're dependent on external sources for the rest of it. And he was simply saying, I don't think we can do much quickly. And then we had this business of 600 missiles a year. We've managed to increase that to 660 a year that we can manufacture. Listen, that's not going to work. We want to be a great power. We want to be a superpower. Trump likes to grandstand about that. Well, I better find out what happened to the manufacturing base. When are we gonna build a manufacturing base that can keep up? That's something the Russians and the Chinese don't have a problem with. We've got a serious problem with it. So all of these statements are ill-advised, these public statements from him, in my judgment.
Doug, I'm curious. How common or uncommon is it in the course of history of making announcements of the strikes that you're going to be making? And here it happened on both sides.
You're saying the Iranians did it. Well, I think they did it as a courtesy to us.
Right.
You have to remember, we are the ones that struck first. And we are the ones backing the Israelis. We are the ones that have opted for war with Iran. Iran's not interested in a war with us. And the Iranian leadership from day one has done everything in its power to avoid provoking us in any way. I think their attitude has been, let's not give the Americans an excuse to do even more than they're already doing for the Israelis. So let's back off as much as we possibly can. I still think that's their view. They will do everything they can to avoid attacking us, avoid any kind of collision with us. And so they picked out Qatar, which they knew was evacuated. That was one of the first places we evacuated. They picked the base. They told us we're going to go in there. They gave us a warning. We went in, destroyed everything, and then they left. Okay. In other words, it's tit for tat. I think you'll always see that from the Iranians. They're not interested in a war with us. And that's very good, because if President Trump were very, very clever, he would exploit that to avoid being drawn in even more into Israel's war, as I said, not just with Iran, but with the whole Muslim world.
Do you think they're humbled enough, Doug, that they won't be as aggressive trying to re-enrich uranium as time goes forward?
I think they will have a nuclear weapon quite soon. And the reason I say that is that the lesson of all of this is that if you have a nuclear weapon, the United States and its friend Israel don't attack you. So the incentive now to build a nuclear weapon is greater than it's ever been.
Right.
And remember, we always had the option of embracing the idea of a nuclear-free zone in the whole Middle East that everybody would sign up for except Israel. Israel is special. Never forget that. Israel deserves everything. No one else deserves anything. And the Israeli position is we have to have these. It all begins with the Holocaust narrative, runs all the way through the 50s, 60s. In fact, in 1952, the Israelis began the process of trying to build nuclear weapons immediately. They wanted them. They felt they had to have them. But remember, it also confers an ability on Israel to, frankly, bully their neighbors. I mean, if you know that your little neighbor next door can march in, do a lot of damage on a conventional level, that's one thing. But if you fight back and you, for instance, manage to win on the battlefield, then you have to reckon that the nuclear weapons will be used against you. So they're not willing to give up this monopoly. That's a monopoly in the region. And that's also the foundation for hegemony. And that's what they want. And that's not just they. We'll talk about that in the future, about what else all of this means in the region, because the banking interests in New York City and the City of London are very interested in the outcome, just as they've been very interested in trying to destroy Russia. Now it's Iran. That's related. But I think we have to understand these things are connected. And now I think the game is up. You will see nuclear weapons in the hands of other countries in the Middle East.
Well, that ties in very specifically, I think, to this next soundbite that I have for you, because here I think, talking about the world economy and markets, here is Trump reaching out, putting out, I guess, maybe a carrot on a stick for Iran. You tell me what you think about this.
Yesterday, you said China can now continue to purchase oil from Iran.
Yeah.
Are you giving up on your maximum pressure campaign? Because there
With
are
who?
sanctions right now.
With who?
On Iran.
No, look, they just had a war. The war was fought. They fought it bravely. I'm not giving up. They're in the oil business. I mean, I could stop it if I wanted. I could sell China the oil myself. I don't want to do that. They're going to need money to put that country back into shape. We want to see that happen. No, if they're going to sell oil, they're going to sell oil. We're not taking over the oil. We could have, I used to say with Iraq, keep the oil. I could say it here, too. We could have kept the oil. No, China is going to want to buy oil. They can buy it from us. They can buy it from other people. But you're going to have to put that country back into shape. It desperately needs money.
Is that a carrot, Doug, or is it more than a carrot? What is it?
I think it's another delusion. The idea of closing the straits is real, and the Iranian parliament voted to do it. I think for the moment, the Iranians have decided they don't need to do anything, because if this recommences, then the insurance companies that have to insure all the oil tankers won't insure them. And if you can't get insurance, what happens? Look at the transit to the Red Sea. It just stopped. No one was willing to insure the freighters, the large container ships. I think you'd have something similar happen in the Straits of Hormuz. So it's kind of moot. Now they can also mine it, and that's quite easy. It's very easy to mine the Straits of Hormuz. And if they're mined, then that's an enormous pain in the neck that will take a long, long time to rectify. But here's the China connection that needs to be kept in mind. The Chinese obviously are very interested in sustaining the flow of oil out of the Persian Gulf. On the other hand, the Chinese have also made it very clear that they stand behind Iran and that they will provide Iran assistance. And I'm sure the Iranians have talked directly to them, as they have with President Putin in Moscow, and said, look, we may have to do this. I also think that the Russians would then double down and triple their petroleum output to supply the Chinese with what they need to make up for the shortfall. In other words, I know that President Trump likes to think that he's the master of the universe and controls everything, and he pitches everything from that vantage point, but we don't. And that should be borne in mind. But I'm glad that he brought it up, because it demonstrates the strategic implications for what we've been doing in the Middle East. And that's why the notion that this war is over is just ridiculous. It's not.
One more. Let me just put the cherry on the cake here. So then, the way everyone is in lockstep with what the narrative that they're trying to propose here. Here's J.D. Vance talking about what he sees, big picture wise, as to what all is going on.
The president's been extremely clear about America's national objective here. It is to create a world where Iran cannot build a nuclear weapon. We, of course, destroyed the nuclear program that they had, and the president told the entire team, we're going to work to make sure that they don't try to rebuild that nuclear capability in the future. For Israel, think about this. They've accomplished an important military objective. They've helped us destroy the Iranian nuclear program. They've also destroyed the conventional missile capability of Iran that threatened the country of Israel. For the Iranians, I think this is a new opportunity to actually pursue the path of peace. As I said yesterday, what the Iranians have showed through their support of terror networks, through their now failed effort to build a nuclear weapon, is that they're just not very good at war. And I actually think when we look back, we will say the 12-day war was an important reset moment for the entire region.
Doug, this reminds me of George Bush on the USS Abe Lincoln, with the big banner behind him, mission accomplished. Mm-hmm. We are victorious. Can you imagine him not regretting what he just said?
Well, if he's the vice president of the United States, he has an obligation to support the president. Never lose sight of that. Having said that, I'm not sure that he doesn't believe at least some of what he said. Mm-hmm. Now, let's look at it from the Iranian standpoint. Iran is not destroyed. Iran has not lost the war. Iran has thousands of missiles, including medium-range ballistic missiles, left with which to carry on the war. It has a manufacturing capability to build more missiles. So the notion that this is somehow a great loss for Iran, and they have no choice now but to back down, is foolish. What he's describing when he says they can now choose a different road to peace, if you're an Iranian, that is the road to submission and subjugation by Israel. That is, you submit unconditionally, as President Trump would say, to whatever the Israelis demand. And I don't see that happening. I just don't. So I think the whole narrative at that point collapses. So I wouldn't worry too much about what's being said right now. I'd worry instead about the potential in the future for this thing to get out of control. Because behind all of this is the lingering possibility that we threaten Iran directly to do infinitely more damage, even to use potentially nuclear weapons. I hope not, but that would very definitely bring us into direct confrontation with Russia and China, and probably a lot of other people. So does this cost him anything? I don't think so at this point.
Right. No. I hear you on that. Doug, you had sent over, and listen, to all of what's going on is certainly taking the limelight. Limelight's not the word, but focus, I guess, on what's going on in Gaza. And you had alerted us, or alerted me, to a report that was done by Harvard. Can you tell us a little bit about this study?
Well, it's entitled a Harvard Link study, and it essentially says there were almost 2.3 million people living in Gaza at the time the campaign to mass expel or murder the people in Gaza. They're down to 189,000, and this particular study suggests that there could be as many as 400,000 Palestinians who've been killed or maimed. But I think largely it's about killing. And I encourage people to read it simply because this is not something that was concocted in Iran or in the back room somewhere in China or anywhere else, which is usually the assertion. Oh, well, this is disinformation.
Right.
This is linked to Harvard. And I think people should look at it and understand how terrible this has been. And that's why I say this war is not over. And the war will not end until this Gaza war is ended. Everybody acts as though, well, who cares about Gaza? This is really just about Iran and Israel. No, it's not. It's not. This is about the Jewish state that does not simply want hegemony in the region. It wants to dominate the region, but also, most important, it's trying to ethnically cleanse all those that it doesn't want inside its borders. That's not going to stop. And apparently we are complicit in all of this. We're helping this along. No one is talking about it in the United States, but it is getting a lot of attention everywhere else. And that's why I say it's not just war with Iran. It's war with the whole Muslim world. And more people in Africa, Latin America, Asia, they're all watching this. And it's horrific.
And we also know that Putin's watching it. And Trump was asked about his relationship with Putin at this point in time.
Joint Chiefs of Staff.
General Kane.
Yes, he has said that Mr. Putin has territorial ambitions beyond Ukraine. Do you view that in the same way?
Possible. I mean, it's possible. I know one thing. He'd like to settle. He'd like to get out of this thing. It's a mess for him. He called the other day. He said, "Can I help you with Iran?" I said, "No, you can help me with Russia." Because, in the last few weeks, we took care of India and Pakistan, Kosovo, Serbia. No, I consider him a person that's, I think, been misguided. I'm very surprised, actually. I thought we would have had that settled easy. I've settled 4 of them in the meantime. But he did call up, and he said, he's close to Iran. He'd like to help us get a settlement. I said, no, you help me get a settlement with Russia. And I think we're going to be doing that too. Yeah.
Not surprising there, Doug, right?
No, it's part of the master of the universe narrative. And I never criticize presidents for taking credit for something good that happens on their watch, whether or not they have anything to do with it, because they're always blamed for anything bad that happens on their watch, whether or not they have anything to do with it. I would dismiss all that crap about how I've settled all these things and everything's better and so forth. Having said that, the Russians are settling things in Ukraine, and they're going to continue to settle those things. And this is going to end when the Russians have decided to end it. And I think the Europeans increasingly know that. And it's not going to make a great deal of difference what we say or do. They're prepared for all the sanctions and all the crippling attempts that we've made to harm them. They're familiar with it. I mean, this is nothing new. The other thing, though, we need to keep in mind is that international relations is not about personal relationships. Anybody who spends time in private with President Trump, I would think, I certainly did, likes President Trump. I like him. Has absolutely nothing to do with the state of affairs between Russia, the United States, or anybody else.
But don't you think Trump? It does that the way he approaches it, that it does depend on personal. At least he talks about it like it depends on charisma and personal relationships.
Well, that's a mistake, and unfortunately, that goes with a personality profile. That's the way he thinks of things, that with himself at the center of everything. But that's not true. Now, he talked about, does he have interest beyond Ukraine? He said, well, it's possible. Well, that's an improvement over the other day, because a few weeks ago, he departed from his earlier arguments before Christmas and at the beginning of his term that Russia had no interest in attacking Eastern Europe, and he started to adopt the neocon narrative that has been propelling this war pointlessly for years, and said, "Oh no, yeah, they'll go in there. That's why NATO's so important." You know, I think a lot of it has to do with whatever somebody said to him before he said something. I think he's he listens very closely to the last person that speaks to him. And I don't see any coherent strategy of any kind. I never have. And I don't see any coherent thinking. I think the one word that describes everything that President Trump does is reactive.
Yeah, impulses.
Yeah, and I think what we just saw with Iran over the last few days, that's all reactive. Well, what do I do now? You know, this has gone too far. I've got to do something. And I think we're going to see more of that, unfortunately, not less of it, because I think we're going to have more unpleasant surprises. We'll see if this short period lasts longer than a couple of days or a couple of weeks. We don't know in terms of quiet. But in Ukraine, Russian forces are pressing ahead. I predict they'll take Kiev, then move south and seize Odessa. And then Ukraine, whatever is left of it, will be a landlocked country. And rump Ukraine then will be, frankly, up for grabs. The Europeans are going to have to decide what they do with it and how they handle it, because I think we'll just walk away from it. And to a large extent, we already have.
I was going to say, he's distant. Trump has distanced himself as much as he could, right? And it continues to, it seems.
Yeah, but he defers to Congress because Congress likes to send money. If you send money and equipment over there, well, then you get a kickback and you profit from it. So,
is there any?
Continue.
I'm sorry. Is there any chance that is going to happen again at this point in time? That they would
happen?
Oh, that they would actually put another aid package forward?
I think it's absolutely possible. But the current funds that are already in the pipeline and equipment, that continues. Again, he could stop all of that. If there's anything I can say about him to this point, it's how indecisive he's been on so many things. It's either do or don't in some cases. It's either do or don't in Ukraine. Don't do it. Get out. End it. And get back to understanding that our top priority is not to fund this corrupt regime in Ukraine, no longer subsidize these policies that were designed to turn Ukraine into a battering ram against Russia. Get out of this. Stop fantasizing about destroying the regime in Moscow. Stop fantasizing about breaking up Russia and stripping it of its resources. That was all behind this nonsense. I think people other than President Trump have completely abandoned that because that's the focus now on the Middle East and the focus on Iran. But I wish he'd be more decisive one way or the other, but he's reactive, and he's reacting to things, and he's saying things on his trip to this this NATO conference that he hopes is going to hold together NATO. Well, that's kind of surprising because some time ago he concluded that NATO was something that should be Europeanized, that should no longer include us. Now he's trying to sell American military equipment and technology to the Europeans. And he's pushing NATO as the solution. Well, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? It's a big turnaround, but you've got to listen to him, not just now, but over the last 8 years, to appreciate just how out of whack all of this is.
I think that's just him being a businessman, isn't it?
Could be, but international relations is very different. And you cannot misrepresent yourself and lie about things. I mean, that's very, very dangerous in international relations. Remember, we lied to the Iranians. We helped the Israelis with their deception plan. There was no intention on our part to reach any agreement with the Iranians that would include any enrichment at all. And Witkoff has made that very clear. And he was part of the game of reeling in the Iranians, convincing them that there was something here when there wasn't. Nobody is going to believe us anymore. They won't. And telling people things that are patently absurd and untrue, things the Russians know are not true, that the Chinese know are not true, it's not going to help us. It's not going to help us with the tariff mess. We're still involved in the tariff mess. We've done enormous damage to ourselves there, not because he couldn't have targeted the tariffs appropriately, but because of this universal application, and then the failure to talk to the Chinese as human beings. We have no humility. This is the other issue. We're in a lot of trouble here at home with our economy, the fragility of our sovereign national debt. The bond market could blow up any minute. I I mean, we could go on. And the point is, under those circumstances, a little bit of humility would be good. We don't have it in our vocabulary. It doesn't exist.
Not now. Doug, with the reputation that we have, or the lack of reputation, it's so damaged now. I mean, it's not going to be changing anytime soon. Certainly not while Trump's in office. He's not going to turn that around.
No, it's going to take years to recover, if ever. And I think there are people in the administration who understand that, but they're not in a position to influence anything. And then look at Israel. My objection to what the Israelis were doing at the very beginning, and I said this to the friends I had there. I said, I don't see anything good coming out of this. I think this will ultimately be catastrophic for Israel. I think it's catastrophic for Israel.
Doug, I'm sorry. Go right ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it just doesn't make sense. If you're fighting for something, do you put at risk everything you have to win the fight? And that's what Israel's done.
Yeah, I've heard you say that you believe that Israel's in tremendous trouble, and that the whole region hates Israel, and that's the position that they now see themselves in.
Yeah, I think the problem in the region for Israel is virtually everyone in the region has concluded that they cannot coexist with Israel. That's a simple.
That's not right, and that's not. At least with Netanyahu, I mean, even if Netanyahu was gone, how different would it be if for whatever he dies tomorrow? Would it change that much?
Well, read the article in the Cradle about the Harvard Link study and the 400,000 dead children and so forth. Mm-hmm. And then you ask the question, let's assume somebody else comes to power in Israel, different kind of government. They say, we regret all of this. We want a clean slate. Good luck.
It's that deep, and it's that deep.
Yes.
Doug, I'm so grateful having you on.
Are we going to cover that map very briefly?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot all about it. Yes, my gosh.
I just think we should show people this.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sorry, I was thinking about other things. That's all. Let's get to it. Talk to us, Doug.
Yeah, I think this particular post, and this showed up in some work by John Helmer, and I take what he says usually with a grain of salt. I mean, he's living in Moscow. That doesn't mean I don't believe him. It's just that his position and makes a difference. When you're writing from Moscow, you're going to write certain things. But in his last post, this was included. I think this is very important for people to see this, because one of the underlying assumptions in both Israel as well as in Washington is that if you pound Iran long enough, it is diverse. It consists of too many diverse groups, and it will fall apart. It will collapse. And it hasn't, and I don't think that it will. But the bottom line is, look at this. You see that number 3, these are Azeri Turks that live just across the border from Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan is a de facto ally of Israel. We know that the Israelis have launched some attacks from Azerbaijani bases, and they would love, the Azeri Turks in Azerbaijan would love to get control of that number 3 there in that territory. You look at 1, that's Kurdish, and the Turks and the Iraqis and the Iranians have all feared the emergence of a greater Kurdistan, and the Mossad is heavily engaged with the Kurds, doing everything they can to promote instability, using the MEK, this is the Turkish terrorist organization, as a way into Iran. Then you have the Arabs. And the interesting thing about the Arabs in Iraq was that Saddam Hussein assumed that they would march in step with him as soon as he attacked. It didn't happen. The Arabs inside Iran all defended Iran. And then you move on down to the bottom there, the so-called Baluchis, number 2. That's a large area adjacent to Pakistan. The Baluchis have always been unhappy from time to time with the Iranians, and the Mossad's been very active down there trying to stir up the Baluchis, who, by the way, have a reputation for being very good soldiers. So I think we have to look at this and juxtapose this picture and the notion that Iran can be broken up and then stripped of its resources, primarily oil and natural gas, and exploited. And juxtapose that with the picture of Russia that was supposed to fail and collapse and undergo regime change, so that Russian resources could be stripped and utilized by the same people who control finance in New York City and the City of London and Washington, D.C. It's all failed. It hasn't happened. Now, the attitude in Washington as well as in Israel is it's not over yet. This is still the goal. They still want to tear this apart if they can do it. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. But there are people that still believe. And that's why I say, you know, all this statement about, oh, it's over, the war is over, and we can all go home. I don't think so.
That's illuminating, Doug. My gosh, to think of it the way you just laid it out like that.
Okay.
Doug, so glad to have you on, and it's just a great feeling to know that we'll get a little bit more knowledge and a little bit more understanding after sitting down with you. So thank you so much, man.
Thanks, Gary. Enjoy yourself. Take care.
Will do. You too.
Bye-bye.
And everybody, as always, we want to thank you so much for being here. We don't take it lightly that you come to the show, and we're grateful for your attention and your loyalty. As always, unintimidated and uncompromised.